Hello, and welcome to What on Earth, the podcast of the Environmental Investigation Agency, or EIA. I'm Paul Newman, EIA Senior Press and Communications Officer, and today we're going to be talking about a startling new EIA report released this week on the issue of bycatch. For those unclear about the term, bycatch is the inadvertent capture of species in fishing gear other than those actually being sought, and in the case of whales, dolphins and porpoises, it's a phenomenon which is killing tens of thousands of them in European waters every year. Joining me today is EIA Senior Ocean Campaigner Sarah Dolman to talk about the findings of her report, Catch of the Day, and what she thinks needs to be done to address the issue of bycatch as a matter of urgency. Sarah, welcome, and thanks for taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
Hi Paul, it's good to chat to you.
It's been a while, so it's good to have you back. Now, to get us started, could you give us an idea as to the scale of the problem in terms of the species and the geographical areas that are actually being impacted?
Sure. So bycatch in fishing gear is a problem everywhere in the world, and here in European waters, it's a problem in every ocean basin. So stretching from the Norwegian Sea in the far north to the Mediterranean in the south, and all the ocean basins in between, including the fragile ecosystems of the Baltic and the Black Seas. So there's no government that is doing enough to protect cetaceans or whales and dolphins and other protected species from bycatch. It's been happening for decades, and scientists started to write papers about cetacean bycatch in the 1990s. And since then, we've got concrete advice on the measures that are necessary to prevent it, but all too often, governments don't implement this advice. And so, as a result, there are no fisheries in European waters that has resolved the issue of bycatch, and we've made disappointingly little progress towards preventing it anywhere.
And what kind of numbers are we actually talking about in terms of mortality?
Well, surprisingly, governments don't make it a requirement to collect bycatch data on board fishing vessels as standard. So available data are very poor. Only about 3% of fishing vessels are monitored. And within European waters, estimates of cetacean bycatch numbers are only available for the two species that are most commonly bycaught, and those are harbour porpoises and common dolphins. So, based on the data provided by bycatch experts, at EIA we calculated that more than 35,000 harbour porpoises are bycaught in European waters every year, including those that drop out of the fishing net before it's hauled on board the boat. Those individuals that drop out of the nets can make up between 18 to 50% of the total number of porpoises or dolphins that are bycaught. So it's really important to include them, even though this doesn't happen as standard at the moment.
When you say they drop out, they're literally caught in the nets and being set for fish, but then before they're hauled on board the boat, they physically leave the net and therefore usually aren't caught,
Yeah,
aren't counted.
yeah, that's right. They aren't counted. So the main ways that we rely on the data are using cameras on board the fishing vessels, or independent scientists, and sometimes the fishermen themselves keep records. But if the animal is caught in the net and then dies, but falls out of the net before it's hauled on board, then obviously those individuals aren't counted, and so without including them in the final numbers, that can be a real problem. And we've got 13 different populations of harbour porpoises in European waters. So that's a lot of populations where those estimates are underestimated. And 8 of those 13 populations are known to be threatened by bycatch. So it's really quite shocking. Um, and there's only considered to be one common dolphin population that ranges across the wider Northeast Atlantic. And their estimated bycatch each year is about 6,400 dolphins, and that's using data from 2020. And scientists have calculated that this bycatch level is 6 times higher than the common dolphin population can withstand. So for all other whale and dolphin species in European seas, it's difficult to know the true extent of bycatch, including for the rare and the little-known populations, such as those that are found further offshore, because we just don't collect enough monitoring data. So, for example, we've got about 28 different species of cetaceans that are regularly found around the UK, yet bycatch levels can only be calculated for harbour porpoises and common dolphins. We don't even have good bycatch estimates or an understanding of the level of bycatch for bottlenose dolphins around the UK, and bottlenose dolphins are our most regularly sighted coastal dolphin species. They wash up on beaches, showing signs of having been entangled in fishing gear in the southwest of England mainly most years, and I expect this level of bycatch is having an impact on the population there.
Can I ask, what is the thinking behind not including that species, or not monitoring them? Is it simply an oversight by governments, or is they just doing the ones that are easier to monitor?
In cases where populations are small and harbour porpoise populations and common dolphin populations tend to be bigger, and therefore you're more likely, if you're only monitoring a small percentage of the fleet, to catch one of those species. Bottlenose dolphin populations tend to be smaller in in the hundreds rather than in the thousands. And so just statistically, if you're not monitoring very much, you're less likely to catch one. And so we really do rely on the strandings data and the evidence of injuries and damage to the animal, whether it's around their beak or their fins, to see that there are signs of the fact that they've been entangled in fishing gear.
And you mentioned earlier that the level of bycatch for harbour porpoises is 6 times what the scientists deem the species can withstand. What are the impacts on the other species from a conservation point of view? Are they seriously threatened by this?
So it's common dolphins that are impacted 6 times the where the bycatch is 6 times the population, and yes, this is a huge conservation issue for common dolphins and for other species that are bycaught. Bycatch is the biggest direct threat to cetaceans of our time. The research that we present in our new report found that 15 different populations of whales, dolphins, and porpoises are impacted because of bycatch in European waters. So, in addition to the harbour porpoise and common dolphin populations that I've already mentioned, we found evidence of population impacts on bottlenose dolphins off the Atlantic Andalusian coast of Spain, off the Algarve in Portugal, and in the northern Adriatic Sea in the Mediterranean. And we also reported impacts on the sperm whale population in the wider Mediterranean. And again, these are just the populations that are impacted for which there are data. There are there may be other populations that are impacted, but the monitoring is too poor for scientists to document this. And I also wanted to mention about the welfare impacts of bycatch because we don't often associate welfare impacts with conservation, but the two can be connected. Um, so some may be familiar with the entanglement issue of large whales, such as humpback whales and minke whales, that get entangled in fishing ropes that are hanging in the water common, usually associated with fishing using pots or creels. And large whales, like humpback whales, can pick up the gear and carry it with them. Sometimes they carry it for weeks or months, and it can be very debilitating and painful for them. And it prevents their free movement and it can prevent their feeding. And sinking ropes have proven to be an effective solution to entanglement in trials that have taken place in Scotland, where this is a particular issue. And we hope that these will lead to measures being implemented throughout the creel fleet in the next few years. But it's quite different for dolphins and porpoises, and they suffer from encounters with fishing gear, mainly with nets. And many of them die trapped in the gear at sea, and they get hauled on board alive sometimes, and they can suffer terrible trauma and injuries during handling and their release. And the physical injuries and the very unpleasant sublethal impacts can lead to a delayed mortality. But almost nothing is known about survival rates of bycaught and released individuals when they're still alive. And the additional mortality, which isn't observed and is not reported, is known as cryptic mortality. and it results from the individuals that drop out of the gear that we've talked about already. Um, those that aren't detected because of a lack of monitoring, or those that are observed by fishers but are not reported, and of course, those resulting from ghost fishing. So, bycatch causes injuries and suffering to many more individuals that are currently recognised and accounted for.
If we can just look at the problem from the other side for a moment, from the point of view of the actual people doing the fishing, is it fair to say that all forms of commercial fishing are responsible for the bycatch of marine mammals, or is it particular kinds of vessels or particular sizes of vessels and the equipment they use?
Different kinds of fisheries have different levels of bycatch risk, but undoubtedly, static gill nets are the most harmful and are responsible for the majority of deaths of dolphins and porpoises, as well as some other species like seabirds, seals, and turtles. Gill nets are basically a wall of durable netting that hangs in the water. They're designed to catch fish by their gills as they pass, hence their name. And these kinds of nets can be stationary where they're anchored in place, or they can be drifting in the water column. They're basically indiscriminate, so they capture anything that attempts to pass through. And there is an increasing recognition that a move away from gill nets is necessary if we want to prevent small cetacean bycatch. And the International Whaling Commission has a scientific committee with an expert subcommittee that specialises in bycatch. And this subcommittee strongly encouraged EU member states and others to invest in the development and adoption of alternative fishing gears to ensure sustainable fisheries and conservation of cetacean populations. And the reductions in gillnet effort, where fisheries and cetacean habitats overlap, and the use of alternative fishing gears by changing to more selective fishing methods that don't catch cetaceans would be more sustainable, and would be an economic win for fishers and an ecological win for consumers and retailers and governments.
And what legal protections are currently in place to prevent bycatch? I mean, is there what's the current state of play? I guess is what I'm asking.
Generally, European nations have very strong laws to prevent and to monitor sensitive species bycatch for cetaceans and for other protected species like seabirds and seals. So, for example, the EU has a suite of relevant laws that relate directly to bycatch prevention, not least of all the Habitats Directive and the Technical Measures Regulation under the Common Fisheries Policy. And since leaving the EU, the UK has a Fisheries Act that was passed in 2020. And all these countries have a legal requirement under their laws to minimise and, where possible, eliminate sensitive species bycatch. So, this requirement includes whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And as such, governments should be implementing measures to prevent bycatch as standard, and ongoing monitoring should be happening at much higher levels than it currently is. So the government shouldn't be waiting until bycatch is at such a high level that it's causing these population impacts, which is the very desperate situation that we're in at the moment. It's obviously bad for whales and dolphins, but it's also bad for fishers because it can mean that by the time the measures are implemented, the bycatch problem is bad enough that very tough mitigation measures are required. And this is what has happened in the Bay of Biscay, where common dolphin bycatch is extremely high and causing population impacts. Bycatch was identified as being a problem back in the 1990s, so that's 30 years ago. But it's only in the last year when a court decision to implement effective measures in the fisheries that are causing the bycatch meant that there was a series of 4-week closures that would take place over winter months for a 3-year period. So, if the French government had taken robust enforcement action years sooner, better solutions could have been found for the wildlife, but also for the fishers.
So, would it be fair to say that although there are rules and regulations in place to prevent bycatch and manage it, that they're not being properly adhered to or enforced equally across the bloc? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The laws are not being properly adhered to, and I would say in any nation in Europe at the moment, governments aren't adequately monitoring bycatch in their fisheries, and they're not implementing effective fleet-wide measures to prevent bycatch. And as a result, about 5 years ago, the European Commission began legal proceedings called infringement against France, Spain, and Sweden, including because of the common dolphin bycatch in the Bay of Biscay and porpoise bycatch in the Baltic proper. And since then, the Commission has begun infringement action against other European member states, including Bulgaria, Croatia, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal. So that's 8 member states in total so far, which gives an indication of the level of unlawfulness. And obviously, legal action is time consuming and it's expensive, so it's not the ideal way to tackle this issue. But the Habitats Directive has been in place since 1992, so that's a really long time, and it includes very explicit measures to tackle bycatch. So it's really important that these legal efforts continue because they do provide an incentive for governments to take more action and to put measures in place to meet the legal requirements. And we've seen that, although the government responses have been inadequate, and they continue to be inadequate, more attention is focused on bycatch measures as a result of the Commission taking these legal steps. So we strongly encourage the Commission to maintain this pressure. We feel it's really necessary for them to do that.
Excellent. And a final question leading on from that. In summation, what do you and the report actually want to see done to tackle and hopefully end bycatch? What do you think is missing that needs to be done from this point?
So there's no doubt that bycatch is a difficult issue to resolve, but there are solutions. They require governments to follow scientific advice and in some cases to make some difficult policy decisions. Bycatch prevention should be considered as an integral part of wider fisheries reform as ecosystem-based approach to fisheries management. And what that means on the ground is that bycatch can sometimes be prevented by reducing fishing effort, switching to low impact fishing gears, or redesigning or altering fishing practices. So, for example, setting at a different time of day or avoiding places with high levels of bycatch. There, there is an over reliance on the use of acoustic pingers to mitigate bycatch. And pingers put out a source of noise to alert animals that the net is there. But they also raise concerns about disturbance and welfare. They're not proven to be effective for many species. They require maintenance from the fisherman's side, and they can be financially they can be expensive. So they're not always the best option. And a wider range of effective mitigation measures can include closed areas or alternative gears. Um, and it's really important to consider these wider options, particularly when more than one species is involved. So, just as an example, the US has adopted what it's called consequence closures to protect harbour porpoises from bycatch in sinking gill nets in the Gulf of Maine. So, large areas will be closed to the gill net fishing fleet unless bycatch rates remain below a certain level. And that puts the burden on the fishermen to improve their performance in complying with measures, and it provides an incentive to improve compliance. And it's an approach I think we should be considering more. And this is particularly the case where populations are vulnerable and where they're endangered. And some populations that we have in Europe for harbour porpoises, the bycatch level is set at 0. They're so vulnerable. So, for example, in the Baltic Sea and the Iberian Peninsula. So, closures and effort reductions are really necessary. And the measures, whatever those are, need to be fleet wide. They've got to be enforceable and effective. And then from the scientific point of view, ICES is a regional body that provides bycatch advice to national and regional governments. And they've provided advice to prevent bycatch for the Baltic porpoise and the Biscay common dolphin. And this advice still hasn't been implemented in full, and it needs to be. There's no requirement for ICES advice to be implemented into management, and this is problematic. And ICES would be well placed to provide similar advice for the other populations that we've identified in our report. This would give governments the opportunity to follow a scientific roadmap, essentially. And then finally, on monitoring, dedicated species bycatch monitoring programs are required by governments. And again, ICES has identified the species that have insufficient monitoring coverage, and it's made recommendations for the level of coverage that's required for common dolphins and harbour porpoises in particular. And they completed a review of the current monitoring programs and proposed criteria that monitoring programs should fulfill. And so this needs to be prioritized alongside bycatch prevention measures.
Well, so one last thought that just occurs to me as you were outlining the various things you'd like to see done. One of the criticisms conservation solutions are often hit by is that they tend to favour, say, wildlife over human income, for want of a better phrase. Do any of these measures, would you anticipate, will actually impact on the ability of fishers to maintain a credible livelihood? Is it something that would have a major impact on fishing fleets in terms of their ability to actually catch fish, or is it simply an upgrade that will still allow them to function as normal?
That's a difficult question to answer. There are almost certainly cases where fishers will be impacted by measures. So, for example, in the Baltic Sea, um, gill nets have been used as a widespread fishing method in the past, but the population of harbour porpoises there is less than 500 individuals. They're critically endangered and declining because of gill nets. The females in that population live for just a few years, and actually they die so young they don't even get a chance to reproduce. So in places like that, then there almost certainly will be an impact on the use of gill nets for fishing. But if governments commit to helping fishers find alternative ways of fishing using gears that don't have an impact on the porpoise population, then that should be really prioritised. In other areas, like in Scotland, where humpback whales and minke whales become entangled in the ropes of creel pots. The fishing community have been very actively involved in trialling what's called sinking ropes, which are weighted ropes that don't hang in the water common, and so they're much less likely to get caught up. The whales are much less likely to get caught up in the ropes, and there's actually, apart from the fishermen having to buy the new rope in the first place, and perhaps in this case it might be subsidised by government, then the rope actually works as well, and so and in some cases the fishermen actually prefer using it. So there are benefits to changes. So it really is, yeah, fisheries dependent.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us today, Sarah. It's been a pleasure chatting.
Thanks very much, Paul.
If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please watch this space for future episodes. And do check out our website at eia-international.org to find out more about our work. Thanks for joining us today, and wherever you are, stay safe out there.